next question from Adam. Thoughts on high sodium for strength sports? This has become pretty popular. A lot of people going a little higher with their sodium intake, hoping for some performance improvements. The RDA, or the recommended intake in the States, last time I checked, I think was like to keep it under 2,300 milligrams a day, so under like 2.3 grams a day.
Seems very plausible.
And it's very clear why that's set. Hypertension is prevalent. Some people are pretty salt sensitive. You know, when salt or sodium goes up in their diet, blood pressure tends to increase a little bit. And so, you know, the recommended intake is largely focused on trying to manage hypertension rates in the segment of the population that is a little bit sensitive to dietary sodium. Now, the RDA is not necessarily for optimal performance for athletes, and that's something we always have to consider. We do lose sodium when we sweat, so higher salt intakes may be tolerated well by some athletes, and in some cases might actually be necessary. So not just well tolerated, but actually beneficial, depending on your rate of sweat loss, the concentration of your sweat, which does vary. And so the reason that this is important for athletes is because sufficient sodium levels help us maintain plasma volume, help encourage us to continue drinking fluids. So sometimes you'll see in sport nutrition strategies, they'll add some sodium to the sports beverage, not because you necessarily need sodium replacement, but because they want you to continue having a thirst response and continue drinking more and more fluid throughout the...
Doesn't it also just hydrate you a little bit faster, though?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
But sometimes they'll specifically kind of highlight that extra sodium. I mean, it absolutely, it does help hydrate you a little bit more than just a water solution.
Yeah.
So there are multifaceted benefits, but there's a lot of athletes who will dehydrate themselves because they just don't feel like drinking water.
Mm-hmm.
And so a nice sports beverage with some sodium and some sugar and things like that, it tastes good. It encourages that thirst response. And the fact that it also hydrates them better is like, oh, terrific. But we really just need them to keep coming back for more cups of beverage, you know? So anyway, absolutely maintaining sufficient sodium levels and drinking a sodium beverage during particular types of exercise can be a good strategy for replacing the sodium that's lost from sweat, encouraging thirst response and more fluid intake, and maintaining hydration. But this is particularly important when it comes to exercise that involves high sweat rates. So if you're lifting in a climate-controlled gym, probably doesn't matter a ton depending on how much you typically sweat and how hot it is in the gym. Now, if you're in like if it's like a Ronnie Coleman training video from back in the day, Texas, right?
Yeah.
So you're, in the middle of Texas, it's July.
I think he trained at Metroflex Houston.
Yeah. So if it's July in Houston and there's no air conditioner, yeah, you're probably losing some sweat, probably losing some sodium. So some degree of replacement might be warranted there. But when we talk about the idea of sodium and actually enhancing performance, the only studies where I've seen that really happen is performance of tasks in situations where hydration status is truly threatening performance. So if you're doing an endurance type exercise that involves high cardiac output, it's in the heat, it's prolonged duration, those are instances where you might find a performance benefit if you're comparing a water solution to a solution with some degree of sodium in it. Now, it is true mechanistically that sodium plays a role in muscle contraction, but we got to pause before we say, therefore, more sodium, more contraction, very strong. The body has very robust mechanisms to maintain stability within a certain range when it comes to blood sodium levels. And that's because sodium and potassium are very important. So that's not the type of thing that your body likes to lose track of. And, of course, with really substantial, with great enough sodium losses at some point those mechanisms could be unable
Yeah.
to maintain appropriate levels of sodium and potassium. But
Well, I mean the same sodium and potassium related like mechanisms of like muscle membrane depolarization. That's the same thing that goes on with like nerve depolarization.
yeah,
So it, as long as your nerves work, your muscles are probably going to work just
yeah,
fine.
and you should,
At least like with regards to electrolyte balance.
yeah, and you do want your nerves working
Yeah,
always when
correct.
possible. So like there was a study by the general point here is if your sodium levels in your blood are getting low enough that muscle contraction is being impacted, you are screwed.
Yeah.
That is not a good spot to be. So it's not that the lifter.
I mean, I don't even know that you would get there. This is complete speculation. I haven't thought about it that much, but I mean, like endurance athletes that die of hyponatremia aren't they generally still running when their brain swells up and they die?
I don't
I
know.
mean, I think their muscles are still functioning well enough to keep them moving while their sodium levels are, from a nervous system perspective, already dangerously low. So
Yeah,
I kind of think that if sodium levels are already low enough that they're affecting muscle contractility, you got a big fucking problem on your hands.
yeah,
And you probably will have noticed it already because you'll be getting delirious.
yeah. So I did find a study looking at this. Title was "Impact of Hyponatremia on Nerve Conduction and Muscle Strength" by Vandergeinst and colleagues. Chronic mild to moderate hyponatremia, like clinical hyponatremia, did not have an impact on muscle strength within that study. And these were not particularly healthy folks within this study. So the overall conclusion here, uh, it's not that taking a big spoonful of sodium is going to supercharge your workout or anything like that. That would not be an accurate representation of the data that I've seen personally. Always open to reviewing new studies that I may not be aware of course. But the general idea is you just want to keep your sodium and potassium levels within healthy, viable ranges, and it usually doesn't take a tremendous amount of effort to do that if you are exercising and losing a lot of sweat and your sweat has particularly high concentrations of sodium. A little bit of sodium replacement might not be a terrible idea, but you probably don't need a super nuanced, deliberate strategy to do any type of sodium loading for performance or anything like that.